Robbie family consisted of Ryan, a successful 45-year-old investment banker with penchant for Brooks Brothers suits, his second wife, Mandy, a striking 38-year-old interior designer with a flair for the dramatic, and Ryan's son from his first marriage, 20-year-old Nathaniel, a college dropout with a chip on his shoulder and a history of minor run-ins with the law. To their neighbors, the Robbies appeared to be living the American dream. Ryan's career was thriving. Mandy's design business was gaining traction among Oakdale's elite, and Nathaniel, despite his academic setbacks, seemed to be finding his footing working at a local garage. Little did anyone suspect that beneath this carefully cultivated image lay a powder keg of secrets, jealousies, and dangerous desires. Ryan Robbie's first marriage to Helena, Nathaniel's mother, had been a whirlwind romance that quickly soured. Helena, a free-spirited artist, found herself stifled by Ryan's rigid lifestyle and expectations. Their arguments, once confined to hushed whispers behind closed doors, escalated into shouting matches that echoed through their home, leaving a young Nathaniel cowering in his room. The divorce, when it came, was bitter and protracted. Helena fought for full custody, painting Ryan as a cold, neglectful father. In the end, the court granted joint custody, but the damage was done. Nathaniel, then only 10 years old at the time, was torn between two warring parents, his loyalty constantly tested. Helena's subsequent move to the West Coast for her art career left Nathaniel feeling abandoned, fueling a resentment that would smolder for years to come. Ryan threw himself into his work, climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded determination. It was at a charity gala, 3 years after his divorce, that he met Mandy Rossi. She was captivating, with her raven hair and quick wit, a breath of fresh air in Ryan's staid world. Mandy saw in Ryan not just financial security, but a chance at the stable family life she'd never had growing up in foster care. Their courtship was swift, and within a year Mandy had moved into the Robbie home. Nathaniel, now 14 and in the throes of adolescent angst, viewed his new stepmother with suspicion and hostility. Mandy's attempts to bond with her stepson were met with cold indifference at best and open hostility at worst. As the years passed, the divide between Mandy and Nathaniel grew. Ryan, eager to avoid conflict, turned a blind eye to the tension, convincing himself that time would heal all wounds. Mandy, frustrated by her inability to connect with Nathaniel, gradually withdrew, focusing on her burgeoning design career and the social circles it opened up to her. Nathaniel's teenage years were marked by rebellion, skipping classes, experimenting with drugs, and petty theft. Each incident widened the chasm between him and his father, with Mandy often caught in the crossfire. By the time Nathaniel grudgingly enrolled in the local community college, the Robbie home had become a battleground of unspoken grievances and simmering resentments, setting the stage for the explosive events to come. The catalyst for the Robbie family's unraveling came on a sweltering July afternoon. Nathaniel, having dropped out of college and now working as a mechanic, returned home earlier than usual, nursing a hangover and a foul mood. The house was quiet, Ryan away on a business trip and Mandy presumably at a client meeting. Seeking aspirin for his pounding headache, Nathaniel entered the master bedroom, a space he usually avoided. As he rummaged through the medicine cabinet, a buzzing sound caught his attention. Mandy's phone, forgotten on the nightstand, lit up with a new message. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of the previous night's indulgences, or simply a malicious impulse, but Nathaniel found himself reaching for the device. The message preview on the lock screen made his eyes widen. "Can't wait to see you later, my love. Axer." His stepmother's phone was locked, but this single message was a key to a Pandora's box of secrets. Over the next hour, Nathaniel sat on his parents' bed, his headache forgotten as more messages arrived, each one more incriminating than the last. He learned that the sender was one Xavier Krasinski, a name he vaguely recognized as a client of Mandy's design business. The messages painted a vivid picture of a torrid affair that had been going on for months. There were references to clandestine meetings, passionate encounters, and promises of a future together. As the reality of his discovery sank in, a mix of emotions washed over Nathaniel. There was disgust at the thought of his stepmother's infidelity, a twisted sense of satisfaction at having ammunition against the woman he'd resented for years, and beneath it all, a spark of opportunity. When Mandy returned home that evening, she found Nathaniel waiting for her in the kitchen, an unsettling smirk playing on his lips. The air was charged with tension as he casually asked about her day, his eyes glinting with newfound knowledge. Mandy, sensing something amiss, answered cautiously, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. Nathaniel wasted no time in revealing his hand. With a casualness that belied the weight of his words, he mentioned Xavier's name, watching as the color drained from Mandy's face. He laid out what he knew, savoring each flinch and gasp from his stepmother as he recounted the details of her affair. Mandy's initial denials quickly gave way to desperate pleas as Nathaniel made his intentions clear. He wanted money, $1,000 a month in exchange for his silence. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years he'd resented Mandy's presence in his life, and now he saw an opportunity to profit from it. Her voice shaking, Mandy tried to reason with him. She spoke of family loyalty, of the pain this would cause Ryan, of the potential to tear their lives apart. But Nathaniel was unmoved. With cold calculation, he pointed out that it was Mandy who had jeopardized their family with her infidelity. He was merely capitalizing on her mistake. The negotiations were tense, with Mandy trying to bargain the amount down and Nathaniel standing firm. In the end, faced with the prospect of losing everything, her marriage, her social standing, her carefully cultivated image, Mandy capitulated. She agreed to Nathaniel's terms, her voice hollow with defeat, as she promised to make the first payment the following day. As Nathaniel left the kitchen, a sense of power surged through him. He had the upper hand for the first time in years, and he intended to make the most of it. Mandy, left alone, her mind racing as she grappled with the magnitude of her predicament. The first payment was made in cash, handed over in a plain envelope in the garage, away from prying eyes. Nathaniel counted the bills slowly, relishing Mandy's discomfort. With a smirk, he reminded her that this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, a new dynamic took hold in the Robbie household. On the surface, little had changed. Ryan remained oblivious, absorbed in his work. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a current of tension crackled. Mandy walked on eggshells, her once confident demeanor replaced by nervous glances and forced smiles. Nathaniel, emboldened by his newfound power, became more openly disrespectful, knowing Mandy wouldn't dare challenge him. As summer waned, the weight of her secret and the strain of meeting Nathaniel's demands began to take their toll on Mandy. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would spiral far beyond her control. As weeks turned into months, the fragile equilibrium in the Robbie home began to crumble. Nathaniel, intoxicated by his newfound power, grew bolder in his demands. The monthly payments, once a source of smug satisfaction, now seemed paltry compared to the control he wielded over his stepmother's life. It started small. Snide comments at the dinner table, thinly veiled threats disguised as innocent conversation. Nathaniel would casually mention Xavier's name in Ryan's presence, watching Mandy's face contort with panic before smoothly changing the subject. He reveled in her fear, in the way her hands would shake as she poured the wine, in the dark circles that began to form under her eyes as sleepless nights took their toll. By October, the original agreement no longer sufficed. Nathaniel cornered Mandy in the laundry room, demanding an increase to $1,500 a month. When Mandy protested, citing the difficulty of explaining the withdrawals to Ryan, Nathaniel's eyes hardened. He reminded her of the photos he'd discovered on her phone, intimate images never meant for his eyes, and how easily they could find their way to Ryan's inbox. Mandy's world was unraveling. The stress of maintaining her secret life with Xavier, coupled with Nathaniel's escalating blackmail, was pushing her to the brink. Her design business began to suffer as she missed appointments and turned in subpar work. Clients, once charmed by her vivacity, now complained about her distracted demeanor and lack of creativity. As autumn progressed, Nathaniel's demands extended beyond money. He began to treat the house as if it were his own, throwing parties when Ryan was away on business trips, leaving Mandy to clean up the aftermath. He borrowed Ryan's prized vintage car without permission, returning it with mysterious dents and scratches. Each transgression was met with a pointed look that silenced any protest Mandy might have mustered. The power dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. Nathaniel now ruled the roost, his every whim catered to by an increasingly desperate Mandy. She found herself walking a tightrope, trying to meet Nathaniel's demands while maintaining the facade of normalcy for Ryan. As Thanksgiving approached, bringing with it the prospect of extended family gatherings and increased scrutiny, Mandy knew something had to give. She couldn't continue like this indefinitely. With growing dread, she realized she needed help, and there was only one person she could turn to. In early December, Mandy made a decision that would set in motion a chain of irreversible events. After weeks of agonizing, she confided in Xavier about the blackmail. The meeting took place in a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, their usual rendezvous point. As Mandy poured out the whole sordid tale, her voice cracking with emotion, Xavier's expression darkened. His initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating anger that sent a chill down Mandy's spine. What Mandy didn't know that Xavier Krasinski was not merely the successful businessman and charming lover she believed him to be. Beneath his polished exterior lay a history of violence and criminal connections that he'd carefully concealed from her. Xavier's past included a stint in prison for aggravated assault, associations with local organized crime, and a reputation for handling problems with ruthless efficiency. As he listened to Mandy's story, wheels began turning in his mind. This wasn't just about protecting their relationship anymore. It was about eliminating a threat. He assured Mandy that he would take care of everything, his tone soothing but his eyes hard as flint. Mandy, desperate for a solution and blinded by her feelings for Xavier, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, she thought, someone else would shoulder this burden. Over the next few days, Xavier set his plan in motion. He reached out to old contacts, gathering information on Nathaniel's habits, his workplace, his favorite haunts. He was meticulous in his planning, leaving nothing to chance. Unbeknownst to Mandy, Xavier had no intention of simply buying Nathaniel's silence or reasoning with him. In Xavier's world, problems like this were solved permanently, and collateral damage was an acceptable risk. As Christmas decorations began to appear in the windows of Oakdale's homes, Xavier made his move. He approached Nathaniel outside the garage where he worked, his demeanor friendly, but his eyes cold. The conversation that followed was brief, but loaded with unspoken threats. Xavier made it clear that he knew about the blackmail, and that Nathaniel was playing a dangerous game. Nathaniel, however, was not as easily cowed as Xavier had anticipated. Years of resentment and the taste of power had hardened him. Instead of backing down, he sneered at Xavier, suggesting that perhaps Ryan would be interested in knowing about his wife's extracurricular activities. As Xavier walked away, his genial mask slipping to reveal a flash of genuine anger, both knew that the stakes had just been raised exponentially. The game was no longer just about money or secrets. It had become a battle of wills, with potentially deadly consequences. The week before Christmas, Xavier decided to take more direct action. His warning to Nathaniel had fallen on deaf ears, and he knew that Mandy was at her breaking point. Under the guise of a pre-holiday drinks invitation, Xavier lured Nathaniel to a secluded area near the old mill on the outskirts of town. The winter air was crisp. He offered a substantial sum, $50,000, for Nathaniel to leave and never contact Mandy again. It was meant to be a final generous offer, before resorting to more drastic measures. Nathaniel, however, had severely underestimated the danger he was in. Emboldened by months of successfully manipulating Mandy, he scoffed at Xavier's offer. In a display of youthful arrogance, he countered with an outrageous demand: $250,000, or he'd expose both Mandy and Xavier to Ryan and the entire community. What happened next was a blur of motion and violence. Xavier, his patience exhausted, lashed out with a speed and ferocity that caught Nathaniel completely off guard. The ensuing struggle was brief but brutal. Xavier's experience and ruthlessness quickly overwhelmed Nathaniel, leaving the younger man battered and bloodied on the frozen ground. As Nathaniel lay there tasting blood and fear for the first time, Xavier delivered a final warning. This was his last chance to walk away, to forget everything he'd seen and heard. The next time, Xavier promised, there would be no warnings, no offers, only consequences. Shaken and in pain, Nathaniel stumbled home that night, his mind reeling. The reality of his situation had finally hit home. He was no longer the one in control. He was in over his head, tangled in a web far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. For a brief moment, as he nursed his wounds in the solitude of his room, Nathaniel considered taking Xavier's advice and disappearing. But as the pain of his injuries gave way to a burning anger, his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to be intimidated. If anything, this attack had only strengthened his determination to see this through to the end, whatever that might be. As Christmas approached, the atmosphere in the Robbie home grew increasingly tense. Mandy, already stretched to her breaking point, now had to contend with Nathaniel's escalating demands and increasingly erratic behavior. The bruises from his encounter with Xavier had faded, but his anger had only intensified. Ryan, no longer able to ignore the palpable tension, began asking more pointed questions. The cracks in Mandy's carefully constructed facade were beginning to show, and she found herself struggling to maintain the illusion of normalcy. It all came to a head on Christmas Eve. The Robbies were hosting their annual holiday party, the house filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. Mandy, dressed in a stunning dress, moved among the guests with practiced ease, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Nathaniel, sullen and nursing a whiskey in the corner, watched his stepmother with barely concealed contempt. As the night wore on and the alcohol flowed freely, his inhibitions lowered dangerously. In a moment of reckless anger, he approached Mandy as she chatted with some of Ryan's colleagues. Whispering in her ear, he demanded another payment, $5,000 this time, by the end of the week. When Mandy, her face pale but composed, tried to quietly reason with him, Nathaniel's control slipped. Mandy, her heart pounding, quickly excused herself and practically dragged Nathaniel to the study. Once there, she unleashed months of pent-up fear and frustration. In hushed but intense tones, she told Nathaniel that she was done. She wouldn't pay him anymore. If he wanted to tell Ryan, then so be it. She was tired of living under the weight of his threats. Nathaniel, caught off guard by her sudden defiance, lashed out verbally, threatening not just to expose her affair but to destroy her reputation, her marriage, her entire life. He stormed out of the study, leaving Mandy trembling but oddly relieved. She had finally stood up to him, consequences be damned. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Mandy knew she had reached a point of no return. Something had to be done, and soon. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and sent a text to Xavier. "We need to talk, it's urgent." January 15th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy about to unfold. Mandy had spent the weeks since Christmas in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, flinching every time Nathaniel entered a room. Her conversation with Xavier had been brief but intense. He had listened to her desperate pleas, his face an unreadable mask, and simply said, "I'll take care of it." Those words, which had initially brought her relief, now haunted her. What exactly did Xavier mean? As much as she wanted an end to Nathaniel's blackmail, the thought of what that end might entail filled her with dread. Nathaniel, for his part, had been unusually quiet since the Christmas Eve confrontation. He seemed to be weighing his options, unsure of how to proceed now that Mandy had called his bluff. The uncertainty only added to the suffocating tension in the house. That evening, Ryan was working late, as he often did. Mandy sat in the living room, absently flipping through a magazine, her mind elsewhere. The sound of Nathaniel's car pulling into the driveway made her stiffen. She heard the front door open, his footsteps in the hall, then silence. Upstairs, Nathaniel entered his room, his mind made up. He was done playing games. Tomorrow, he would tell his father everything. Let the chips fall where they may. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching his door. The knock, when it came, startled him. Expecting Mandy, he opened the door with a sneer already forming on his lips. The sight of Xavier standing there, his expression grim, wiped the sneer away instantly. What happened next was a flurry of violence that lasted mere minutes, but would have repercussions for years to come. Xavier forced his way into the room, closing the door behind him. Words were exchanged. Threats, pleas, desperate bargaining. But Xavier hadn't come to negotiate. The first blow caught Nathaniel by surprise, sending him stumbling back against his desk. He fought back, his youth and desperation lending him strength, but Xavier's experience and cold determination proved too much. The struggle was brutal but brief. Downstairs, Mandy heard the muffled sounds of the fight, her heart racing. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, paralyzed by indecision and fear. A part of her knew she should intervene, call for help, do something. But another part, the part that had endured months of torment and blackmail, kept her rooted to the spot. The silence when it fell was deafening. Mandy's legs trembled as she forced herself to climb the stairs. She found Xavier standing in Nathaniel's doorway, his shirt spattered with blood, his eyes cold and empty. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of a still form on the floor and had to stifle a scream. Xavier's voice was calm, almost soothing as he guided her back downstairs. He spoke of accidents, of self-defense, of necessary evils. Mandy heard the words but couldn't process them. All she could think about was the sight of Nathaniel's lifeless body, and the knowledge that in a way she was responsible for what had happened. As Xavier methodically began to clean up, to erase the evidence of what had transpired, Mandy sat in the kitchen, her mind reeling. The nightmare she had been living for months had just taken a turn she could never have imagined, and she knew with chilling certainty that her life would never be the same again. The hours that followed Nathaniel's death were a blur of frantic activity and cold calculation. Xavier, drawing on skills honed through years of criminal association, took charge of the situation with ruthless efficiency. Mandy, still in shock, found herself following Xavier's instructions mechanically. They cleaned the room meticulously, removing any trace of Xavier's presence. Nathaniel's body was wrapped in a tarp from the garage, then loaded into the trunk of Xavier's car under the cover of darkness. As dawn broke, Xavier drove away with grim purpose, leaving Mandy alone in the house with the impossible task of maintaining normalcy. When Ryan returned home later that morning, exhausted from his late night at the office, Mandy forced herself to greet him with a smile that felt like it might shatter her face. The day passed in a haze of mundane activities and internal panic. Mandy cooked, cleaned, and chatted with Ryan, all while her mind screamed with the knowledge of what had happened. When Ryan casually asked about Nathaniel's whereabouts, Mandy heard herself reply that he had mentioned going on a road trip with some friends. As days turned into weeks, the lie grew more elaborate. Mandy created a digital trail, sending emails from Nathaniel's account to Ryan, describing fictional adventures in various cities. She fielded concerned calls from Nathaniel's workplace, spinning tales of family emergencies and extended leaves of absence. Xavier had disposed of Nathaniel's body in an abandoned quarry several hours away, weighing it down to ensure it wouldn't be found. He meticulously eliminated any evidence that could connect them to Nathaniel's disappearance. For a while, it seemed their hastily constructed cover-up might hold. Life in Oakdale continued, with only a ripple of concern about Nathaniel's prolonged absence. But as winter gave way to spring, and Nathaniel's silence stretched on, questions began to multiply. Ryan's initial unconcern turned to worry, then to suspicion. Mandy found herself trapped in a web of lies that grew more complex and fragile with each passing day, knowing that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Detective Sandra Sloan had seen her fair share of missing persons cases in her 15 years with the Oakdale Police Department, but something about Nathaniel Robbie's disappearance nagged at her from the start. The pieces didn't quite fit. The sudden departure, the sporadic communication, the lack of financial activity. As spring bloomed in Oakdale, Detective Sloan dug deeper into the Robbie family dynamics. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and neighbors, slowly piecing together a picture of a household fraught with tension. The more she learned, the more her suspicions grew. Ryan Robbie, initially reluctant to involve the police, became an increasingly vocal advocate for finding his son. His faith in Mandy's explanations had begun to waver, and he pressed for a more thorough investigation. This pressure, combined with Detective Sloan's relentless pursuit of the truth, began to expose the cracks in Mandy's carefully constructed narrative. The breakthrough came in late April, when one of Nathaniel's co-workers at the garage came forward with crucial information. He recalled overhearing a heated argument between Nathaniel and Mandy just before Christmas, with mentions of money and threats. This revelation shifted the entire focus of the investigation. Detective Sloan brought Mandy in for questioning, subjecting her to hours of intense interrogation. Mandy, worn down by months of guilt and fear, began to falter. Her story, once seamless, now showed inconsistencies. She stumbled over dates, contradicted her earlier statements, and grew visibly agitated when pressed about her relationship with Nathaniel. As Mandy's composure crumbled, Detective Sloan sensed she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She decided to take a risk, bluffing about evidence they didn't actually have. She mentioned phone records showing frequent contact with an unknown number around the time of Nathaniel's disappearance, implying they knew about Xavier's involvement. The gambit worked. Mandy, believing the police knew far more than they actually did, broke down. Through tears and gasping sobs, she confessed to the affair, the blackmail, and her knowledge of Nathaniel's fate. She implicated Xavier, portraying herself as a terrified bystander to his actions. With Mandy's confession, the case broke wide open. An APB was issued for Xavier Krasinski, and search teams were dispatched to the quarry where Nathaniel's body had been hidden. As news of the confession spread through Oakdale, the community reeled from the shocking revelations. The picture-perfect family on Maple Street had harbored darker secrets than anyone could have imagined. In the days following Mandy's confession, Oakdale became the center of a media frenzy. News vans lined Maple Street, reporters clamoring for any tidbit of information about the scandalous murder that had rocked the quiet suburb. Detective Sloan, now heading a task force dedicated to the case, worked tirelessly to bring all the perpetrators to justice. Thanks to Detective Sloan's skillful coordination with state and federal authorities, Xavier was apprehended at a bus station in Nevada, attempting to cross into Mexico. His arrest was the final piece of the puzzle. Under intense interrogation, Xavier eventually corroborated much of Mandy's story, though he attempted to paint himself as a man driven to desperate measures by love. He revealed the location of key evidence, including the murder weapon and some of Nathaniel's personal effects, which he had kept as a twisted sort of trophy. As the full extent of the conspiracy came to light, the impact on those involved was profound. Ryan Robbie, confronted with the brutal truth of his wife's infidelity and his son's death, withdrew from public life. Friends reported that he seemed a shell of his former self, devastated by the twin betrayals of the two people he had trusted most. The community of Oakdale, once so proud of its safe, wholesome image, was forced to confront the darkness that had festered beneath the surface. For Detective Sloan, the resolution of the case was bittersweet. While she took pride in unraveling the complex web of lies and bringing the perpetrators to justice, she couldn't shake the feeling that if she had pieced things together sooner, a young man's life might have been saved. In the end, justice was served, but it brought little comfort to those most affected. Xavier, with his history of violence and his role as the primary actor in Nathaniel's death, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mandy, despite her attempts to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, was found guilty of conspiracy and accessory to murder. She received a 25-year sentence, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Ryan Robbie, a broken man, sold the family home and left Oakdale, unable to bear the constant reminders of his loss and betrayal. He retreated to a quiet life in another state, where he could grieve in private and attempt to rebuild some semblance of a life. The case left an indelible mark on Oakdale. The community, once known for its low crime rate and family-friendly atmosphere, now found itself grappling with a new, unwelcome notoriety. Scarlett Reeves was a rising star in the world of corporate law when she first encountered Darren Felton at a charity gala in Richmond. At 28, she was ambitious, brilliant, and strikingly beautiful. Darren, 15 years her senior, was immediately smitten. As the CEO of his successful manufacturing company, he exuded power and confidence. His salt and pepper hair and tailored suit spoke of wealth and influence, and Scarlett found herself drawn to his charisma and worldly experience. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and lavish gifts. Darren wooed Scarlett with the kind of attention and luxury she had always dreamed of, but never experienced in her middle-class upbringing. Within 6 months, he had proposed with a diamond ring that could have paid off her student loans twice over. The wedding was the social event of the season in Sunnyside, where Darren had recently relocated his company headquarters. Scarlett walked down the aisle of the town's historic chapel, resplendent in a designer gown, her face glowing with what appeared to be joy and love. As they exchanged vows, neither could have predicted how quickly their fairy tale would unravel. The first year of marriage seemed idyllic on the surface. Scarlett left her job in Richmond to become the perfect society wife, throwing herself into charity work and social events. But behind closed doors, cracks began to appear. Darren's controlling nature, at first masked as protectiveness, became suffocating. He questioned her every move, criticized her choices, and slowly isolated her from her former colleagues and friends. Scarlett found herself trapped in a gilded cage, her once vibrant personality dimming under the weight of Darren's expectations. She tried to rekindle her legal career, but Darren vehemently opposed the idea, insisting that his wife need not work. Their arguments became more frequent, their silences more prolonged. As the years passed, the Feltons maintained a facade of marital bliss for the town to see. They hosted elaborate dinner parties, attended every important social function, and donated generously to local causes. But those closest to them noticed the strain. Scarlett's smiles never quite reached her eyes, and Darren's possessive hand on her waist seemed more like a shackle than a loving gesture. By their 5th anniversary, the love that had once burned so brightly had been reduced to cold ashes. They slept in separate bedrooms, their conversations reduced to terse exchanges about household matters and social obligations. It was into this atmosphere of quiet desperation that Chris Felton would arrive, unknowingly setting in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed. The summer of 2017 brought an unexpected change to the Felton household. Chris, Darren's 18-year-old son from his first marriage, arrived in Sunnyside with little more than a duffel bag and a rebellious attitude, handsome and standing at 6 feet tall. Chris's childhood had been marked by his parents' bitter divorce when he was just 5 years old. His mother, Adrienne, had struggled with addiction, leaving Darren to gain full custody. However, Darren's demanding career meant that Chris was primarily raised by a series of nannies and boarding schools. The result was a young man who felt abandoned by both parents, harboring a deep-seated resentment towards his father. After a tumultuous freshman year at college, marked by academic probation and a stint in rehab for alcohol abuse, Chris had been given an ultimatum by Darren: come home, work for Felton his company, and get his life together, or be cut off entirely. With few options and even less enthusiasm, Chris had grudgingly agreed. Scarlett's first encounter with her stepson was awkward at best. She had met him briefly at the wedding 5 years prior, but the sullen 14-year-old had transformed into a strikingly handsome young man. For his part, Chris was taken aback by Scarlett's youth and beauty, having expected someone closer to his father's age. Darren wasted no time in putting Chris to work, insisting he start at the bottom of the company ladder. This meant long hours at the factory, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. It was a punishing schedule designed to instill discipline, but it only served to deepen the rift between father and son. As the weeks passed, Scarlett found herself increasingly drawn to Chris's presence in the house. His youthful energy and rebellious spirit were a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere she had grown accustomed to. She began to look forward to their brief interactions, a shared laugh over breakfast, a sympathetic smile when Darren was being particularly demanding. Little did any of them realize that Chris's arrival had set the stage for a dangerous attraction that would soon spiral out of control, threatening to destroy the fragile balance of the Felton family forever. The catalyst for Scarlett and Chris's illicit relationship came on a sweltering August night. Darren was away on a business trip, leaving Scarlett alone in the vast, empty house. Unable to sleep in the oppressive heat, she had gone downstairs for a glass of water, only to find Chris in the kitchen, shirtless and glistening with sweat after a late-night run. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Scarlett found herself mesmerized by the defined muscles of his chest, the vulnerable look in his eyes, so unlike his father's hard gaze. Chris, in turn, was struck by Scarlett's beauty, her silk nightgown clinging to her curves in the humid air. They talked for hours that night, sharing confidences they had never dared voice before. Scarlett spoke of her frustrations with Darren, her feelings of being trapped and unfulfilled. Chris opened up about his troubled relationship with his father, his struggles with addiction, and his dreams of breaking free from the Felton legacy. As dawn broke, they found themselves drawn together, their lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts passion and desperation. It was a moment of weakness that would have far-reaching consequences. In the days that followed, Scarlett and Chris tried to forget what had happened, to chalk it up to a moment of madness. But the attraction between them had been unleashed, and it proved impossible to ignore. Stolen glances across the dinner table, lingering touches as they passed in the hallway. Every interaction was charged with forbidden desire. Their first real tryst occurred 2 weeks later. Darren had fallen asleep early, as he often did after drinking too much scotch. Scarlett slipped out of their bedroom and made her way to the pool house, where Chris had taken up residence. Under the cover of darkness, they gave in to their passion, their lovemaking urgent and frantic, both aware of the enormous risk they were taking. As the affair deepened, so did their emotional connection. Scarlett rediscovered parts of herself she thought long buried: her wit, her adventurous spirit, her capacity for joy. Chris, for his part, found in Scarlett the love and acceptance he had always craved. They began to imagine a future together, away from Darren's controlling influence and the suffocating expectations of society. But reality had a way of intruding on their fantasies. The guilt weighed heavily on both of them, particularly Scarlett. She was acutely aware of the betrayal, not just of her marriage vows, but of the trust Darren had placed in her as a stepmother to his son. Chris struggled with his own conflicting emotions, the thrill of the affair warring with his complicated feelings towards his father. Despite the risks, they found it impossible to end their relationship. They began to take greater chances, meeting in secluded spots around town, exchanging passionate emails, and even sneaking away for a weekend trip under the guise of Scarlett visiting an old college friend. As autumn approached, their affair had become all-consuming. Scarlett walked a constant tightrope, playing the role of devoted wife while secretly planning rendezvous with Chris. She knew that what they were doing was dangerous, potentially ruinous for all involved. But in Chris's arms, she felt alive for the first time in years. Neither Scarlett nor Chris could have foreseen the tragic turn their secret passion would take. As they continued to weave their web of lies and stolen moments, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of the Felton family and leave an indelible mark on the town of Sunnyside. As summer faded into fall, Scarlett Felton found herself caught in an increasingly complex web of deceit. By day, she maintained her role as the perfect society wife, attending charity luncheons, hosting dinner parties, and standing dutifully by Darren's side at corporate events. But in stolen moments, hidden from the prying eyes of Sunnyside's gossip-hungry residents, she was a woman transformed, alive with passion in the arms of her young lover. The strain of her double life began to take its toll. Scarlett lost weight, her appetite diminished by the constant stress of maintaining her secret. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, poorly concealed by expensive concealers. She jumped at unexpected noises, always fearing discovery. Chris, too, felt the pressure of their clandestine affair. His performance at work suffered as he spent more time thinking about Scarlett than focusing on his tasks. He became withdrawn, avoiding the company of his coworkers and the few friends he had made in town. His nights were spent either in secret rendezvous with Scarlett or lying awake, torn between exhilaration and guilt. Their need for each other grew increasingly reckless. They began to take greater risks, meeting in less discreet locations. Once they narrowly avoided discovery when Darren unexpectedly returned home early from a business trip, forcing Chris to hide under the bed for hours until he left. Another time, a nosy neighbor nearly caught them in an embrace in the garden. The constant fear of exposure was matched only by the addictive thrill of their forbidden romance. Each close call, rather than serving as a warning, seemed to fuel their passion further. They reveled in the excitement of secret codes, clandestine messages, and the elaborate plans required to steal even a few moments alone. Yet beneath the surface, doubts began to creep in. Scarlett found herself wondering if she was truly in love with Chris, or simply infatuated with the idea of escape he represented. Chris, for his part, grappled with conflicting feelings about his father. Despite years of resentment, he couldn't fully shake the guilt of betraying Darren in the most personal way possible. As autumn progressed, the weight of their secret became almost unbearable. Both Scarlett and Chris knew that something had to give. They couldn't continue living this double life indefinitely, but neither was prepared for the violent way their carefully constructed house of cards would come crashing down around them. As October arrived, bringing with it a chill in the air and the first hints of falling leaves, the atmosphere in the Felton household grew increasingly tense. Darren, once content to bury himself in work and scotch, began to take notice of the subtle changes in his wife and son. But as the weeks wore on, his suspicions deepened. He noticed Scarlett's sudden interest in her appearance, buying new clothes and spending more time at the salon. Chris, usually sullen and argumentative, had become almost docile, agreeing to work overtime without complaint, and even joining Darren for the occasional drink after work. The turning point came when Darren overheard a snippet of conversation between two of his employees at the factory. They quickly fell silent as he approached, but not before he caught a mention of Chris's name and something about the boss's wife. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to grow rapidly. Darren's behavior shifted subtly but noticeably. He began to come home from work at unpredictable hours. His eyes narrowed with suspicion as he surveyed the house upon arrival. He asked probing questions about Scarlett's daily activities and Chris's whereabouts, his tone casual, but his gaze intense. In town, whispers began to circulate. Sharp-eyed neighbors had noticed Scarlett's car parked near the lake at odd hours, or Chris slipping out of the house late at night. Scarlett and Chris, caught up in the intoxicating rush of their affair, remained oblivious to the growing suspicions around them. They continued their secret meetings, each one a little more daring than the last, convinced that their careful planning and discreet behavior had kept their relationship hidden. But as Halloween approached, bringing with it the promise of masquerades and secrets, the truth was creeping ever closer to the surface. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the peaceful facade of the community and forever change the lives of everyone involved. The night of October 30th, 2018, began like any other in the Felton household. Darren had announced over dinner that he would be working late. Scarlett and Chris exchanged subtle glances, their pulses quickening at the prospect of an unexpected opportunity to be alone. As Darren's car pulled out of the driveway, Scarlett felt the familiar mix of excitement and guilt wash over her. She waited a prudent 30 minutes before making her way to the pool house, where Chris was waiting. Their passionate embrace was tinged with a sense of desperation. Both were acutely aware that their time together might be running out. Unknown to them, Darren had not gone to the office. Acting on his growing suspicions, he had driven around the block and parked his car out of sight, then stealthily made his way back to the house. As he crept through the darkened garden, the glow from the pool house windows caught his attention. Moving closer, he heard muffled voices and laughter, sounds that stopped him cold in his tracks. Through a gap in the curtains, Darren saw a scene that shattered his world. Scarlett and Chris were entwined on the small bed, their naked bodies illuminated by candlelight. The intimacy of their embrace left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. For a moment, Darren stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the betrayal unfolding before his eyes. Then a red haze of rage descended. He burst through the pool house door, his sudden appearance causing Scarlett to scream and Chris to leap to his feet. What followed was a blur of violence and shouted accusations. Darren lunged at Chris, his fists connecting with his son's face and body. Scarlett tried to intervene, only to be shoved aside with such force that she crashed into a glass table, shards cutting into her skin. The commotion drew the attention of a neighbor, who called 911 reporting sounds of a violent altercation. But by the time police sirens could be heard in the distance, the confrontation had already reached its tragic climax. In the chaotic struggle, Darren's hand had closed around a heavy ashtray. Flying with rage, he swung it at Chris, the impact producing a sickening crack as it connected with his son's skull. Chris crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The sight of Chris's still form seemed to snap Darren out of his frenzy. He staggered backward, the bloody ashtray slipping from his grasp. Scarlett, ignoring her own injuries, rushed to Chris's side, desperately trying to stem the flow of blood. It was at this moment that Darren made a fateful decision. His life as he knew it was over. His marriage a sham, his son gravely injured by his own hand. In a final, desperate act, he reached for the handgun he kept hidden in his study. Scarlett, hearing Darren's movements, looked up just in time to see him raise the gun. Her scream was drowned out by two deafening shots. Darren's body jerked as the bullets tore through him, and he collapsed to the floor. Seconds later, the first police officers burst into the house, following the trail of destruction to the pool house. They were met with a scene of carnage. Darren dead on the floor, Chris unconscious and critically injured, and Scarlett covered in blood, cradling Chris's head in her lap. As paramedics rushed in and the house became a flurry of activity, Detective Rowan Thorne arrived on the scene. Looking at the devastation before him, he knew that unraveling the events of this night would be one of the most challenging cases of his career. Little did he know that the truth would be even more complex and heartbreaking than this blood-soaked scene suggested. In the days following the tragedy at the Felton residence, the town was gripped by shock and morbid fascination. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the property as a stream of investigators came and went, piecing together the events of that fateful night. Detective Rowan Thorne took charge of the investigation, his normally impassive face betraying the gravity of the situation. His first order of business was to interview Scarlett, the only conscious witness to the crime. She sat in the sterile interrogation room at the police station, her haunted eyes rimmed with dark circles. Scarlett's account of the night's events was disjointed and emotional. She admitted to the affair with Chris, describing how their relationship had developed over the summer. She recounted Darren's violent reaction upon discovering them together, and his subsequent suicide. Throughout her statement, Scarlett's concern seemed focused primarily on Chris's condition, barely acknowledging her husband's death. Meanwhile, forensics teams combed through the Felton home, collecting evidence that would help corroborate or contradict Scarlett's story. They discovered a journal in Darren's study, its final entries revealing his growing suspicions and the toll they had taken on his mental state. Emails and text messages retrieved from the family's devices painted a picture of a household fraught with tension and secret communications. Chris, meanwhile, lay in a coma in the ICU of the General Hospital. Doctors were uncertain if he would ever regain consciousness, and if he did, what information he might be able to provide about the night's events. Scarlett spent every possible moment by his bedside, her vigil raising eyebrows among the hospital staff and fueling further gossip in town. As the investigation progressed, Detective Thorne found himself grappling with inconsistencies in the evidence. The angle of Darren's gunshot wounds didn't quite match Scarlett's description of events. Trace evidence suggested that the crime scene might have been altered before police arrived. And then there was the matter of Darren's life insurance policy, a multi-million-dollar payout that named Scarlett as the sole beneficiary. With each new piece of evidence, the detective felt he was moving further from the truth rather than closer to it. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, darker secrets yet to be uncovered beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family and their picturesque small-town life. As weeks passed, Detective Thorne's investigation took unexpected turns, revealing layers of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. Each new discovery painted a more complex picture of the Felton family dynamics and the events leading up to that fatal night. A breakthrough came when Chris finally regained consciousness. His statement, given in halting words between bouts of pain and confusion, differed significantly from Scarlett's account. Chris spoke of a plan, not just to continue their affair but to eliminate Darren permanently. According to Chris, it was Scarlett who had suggested that they murder her husband, staging it as a suicide to claim the life insurance money and start a new life together. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Thorne ordered a more thorough forensic analysis of the crime scene, which uncovered trace amounts of a powerful sedative in a glass found in Darren's study. Toxicology reports on Darren's body, rushed through the lab, confirmed the presence of the same drug in his system. Perhaps most shockingly, Thorne uncovered evidence suggesting that Darren had been involved in the death of his first wife. What had been ruled an accidental overdose years ago now appeared suspiciously like a carefully orchestrated murder. The detective's theory began to take shape. Scarlett, trapped in an abusive marriage and aware of Darren's criminal activities, had seduced Chris not out of passion, but as part of a calculated plan. She had manipulated the young man's resentment towards his father, convincing him that eliminating Darren was not just for their love, but an act of long overdue justice. Their plan, it seemed, had been to drug Darren and stage his suicide. But something had gone wrong. Whether Darren had realized what was happening, or the dosage had been miscalculated, he had awakened and confronted them earlier than expected. The ensuing chaos had led to the violent confrontation and Darren's death, not by his own hand, but likely shot by Scarlett in what she would claim was self-defense. As Thorne pieced together this narrative, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. Chris, a young man damaged by years of paternal neglect and abuse, had been drawn into a web of manipulation by the very woman he thought would save him. Scarlett, while undoubtedly a victim of Darren's cruelty, had chosen a path of deception and violence that had spiraled out of control. The truth, Thorne realized, was far more complex than any simple narrative of a love affair gone wrong. It was a story of generational trauma, abuse of power, and the desperate lengths people will go to escape their circumstances. A story that would forever change the way Sunnyside viewed the family it had once admired. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of Scarlett as a cold, calculating woman who had seduced her teenage stepson and manipulated him into helping her murder her husband. They presented evidence of the affair, the life insurance policy, and the inconsistencies in Scarlett's initial statements to the police. The defense, however, argued that Scarlett was a victim of years of abuse at Darren's hands. They portrayed her actions as desperate attempts to escape a controlling, violent husband. Chris's testimony became a central point of contention, with the defense claiming his memory was unreliable due to his head injury and the trauma of the event. Expert witnesses were called to testify about the effects of long-term abuse, the reliability of memories formed during traumatic events, and the complex financial dealings of his company. Each day brought new revelations and twists, keeping the town on edge. The most dramatic moment came when Scarlett herself took the stand. Her testimony was a mix of tearful remorse and steely determination. She admitted to the affair with Chris, but insisted that Darren's death had been unplanned, a result of his violent attack on them. Her performance was compelling, leaving many in the courtroom, and those watching the televised proceedings unsure of what to believe. Scarlett, who had maintained her composure throughout the trial, finally crumbled, as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the premeditated nature of the crime and the manipulation of her stepson. The spectators filed out, their animated discussions a mix of vindication and disbelief. In the end, the true legacy of the Felton tragedy was not in its salacious details or courtroom drama, but in the quiet reflections it prompted in countless homes. It forced a reckoning with the complexities of human nature, the insidious nature of abuse, and the devastating consequences of choices made in desperation. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes's team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming, but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes's team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds' double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance, and the subsequent focus on David, threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate, discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister. Although the details were vague, this new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered.